Dean Martin walked back to his table at the Sands Hotel, expecting laughter, maybe a refill of his drink. Instead, he was met with silence. A silence so thick it felt like the room was holding its breath. The VIP section of the casino, usually a blur of clinking glasses and murmured deals, had gone completely still. People weren't talking. They were watching, and they were all looking at his wife, Jeanne. She sat motionless, her back straight, eyes frozen on the table. At first, Dean didn't understand. Then he saw it. The deep crimson stain soaking through her white Dior gown, pooling across her lap like blood. The same gown she'd spent weeks gushing over, flown in from Paris, worn tonight with pride, and now ruined. Not by accident, not by fate. Standing beside her was a man Dean recognized immediately. Vincent, not his real name, but the kind of man who never needed one. A mob boss, untouchable, dangerous, and in his hand was an empty wine glass, still dripping. Vincent was smiling. Dean's smile vanished. He didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. But in that moment, the entire room understood they had just witnessed a line being crossed. And what Dean Martin did next would leave Las Vegas speechless. To understand the weight of what happened that night, you need to understand Las Vegas in 1965, because this wasn't the Disneyland in the desert you know today. Vegas back then didn't run on slot machines and stage lights. It ran on fear, favors, and silence. The mob owned the city. Not figuratively, literally. They controlled the casinos, the police, the politicians. If you ordered a drink at the Sands, chances are it was paid for with laundered money. If you sat too close to the wrong table, you got moved, or you disappeared. Everyone knew the rules, even if no one dared to say them out loud. And at the center of it all stood the Sands Hotel, a glittering empire of vice and velvet. This wasn't just where the rich came to play. It was the unofficial headquarters of the Rat Pack. Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr. They were the kings of the stage, the ones the cameras loved. But behind the curtain, the real power wore tailored suits and said nothing. Mobsters walked the same halls as Hollywood royalty. They didn't scream. They didn't threaten. They didn't have to. A raised eyebrow, a nod, that was enough. In this world, respect wasn't given, it was enforced. And the only thing more dangerous than a made man was a made man who felt disrespected. Dean Martin knew this world, knew how fast it could turn on you. And still, he was about to do something no one else had ever dared. They called him Vincent, not his real name, of course, but a man like him didn't need real names. He was one of those shadows that moved through Vegas in silence, always surrounded, never questioned. He didn't walk into rooms. He owned them. And on paper, Vincent was untouchable. He ran operations for one of the most feared crime families on the West Coast. He had stakes in several casinos, cops on payroll, judges on speed dial. When he snapped his fingers, problems disappeared. But what made Vincent truly dangerous wasn't just the power, it was how he liked to use it. Vincent had a reputation, one whispered behind closed doors. He drank too much, talked too loud, and had a twisted obsession with humiliating men he envied. Especially famous men, especially their wives. It wasn't about attraction, it was about control. A show of dominance. A message, I can take what's yours, and you can't stop me. That night at the Sands, Vincent had been watching Jeanne Martin all evening. His comments to his associates grew sloppier with every glass of scotch. She's wasted on Dean, he muttered. Doesn't even know what he's got. His crew laughed nervously. They knew the signs. Vincent was getting that look in his eye, the one that came right before something reckless. And when Dean stepped away from the table, Vincent saw it not as coincidence, but as permission. Dean had only been gone for a few minutes. A quick detour to sign autographs, pose for photos. He was being gracious, as always. But those few minutes were all Vincent needed. Across the room, he watched Dean's back retreat into the crowd. And then, with the kind of entitlement only a man drunk on both liquor and power could possess, Vincent stood up. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and made his way to Jeanne Martin's table, uninvited, unbothered. Mrs. Martin, he slurred, flashing a crooked grin. You look absolutely stunning tonight. Jeanne froze. She recognized him. Everyone in Vegas did. She offered a polite nod, thank you, then turned away, a clear signal. But Vincent didn't care. Or maybe, he cared too much about not being ignored. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down without asking. Mind if I join you? Your husband seems preoccupied. Jeanne's voice was calm but firm. Actually, I do mind. Dean will be back in a moment. The moment she said it, the temperature in the room dropped. Vincent leaned in, breath thick with alcohol. Dean, your husband. You think that makes you untouchable? Jeanne didn't answer. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong, but no one, no waiter, no security, moved. In Vegas, when the wrong man crossed the line, you pretended you didn't see. Vincent's smile twisted. He lifted his wine glass, half full of deep red Bordeaux, and studied it like a work of art. Then, slowly, deliberately, he looked at Jeanne, at her flawless white Dior gown, at the way she was trying not to show fear. You know what? He said with a smirk. I'm feeling a little clumsy tonight. And then he poured it, straight into her lap. The cold wine soaked through the delicate fabric instantly. It bled into the dress like ink on silk, turning elegance into ruin. Jeanne gasped, but didn't scream. She sat frozen, her dignity the only thing she had left to hold on to. Around them, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Everyone stared, but no one intervened. Vincent stood, smug and swaying. Oops, he said. Guess I had too much to drink. His associates chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or run. Jeanne sat in silence, her hands trembling in her lap, red wine still dripping. But she didn't wipe it away. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction, because she knew something no one else did yet. Dean Martin was on his way back. Dean Martin didn't storm across the room. He didn't demand answers. He simply walked, calmly, slowly, toward the table, like a man who already knew the score and didn't need to raise his voice to change the game. He'd just finished shaking hands and signing autographs. He was smiling, relaxed, until he saw the silence, until he saw the stares, until he saw Jeanne, sitting stiffly in her chair, soaked in red, trying not to cry. The smile vanished. His pace never changed. Then he saw Vincent, standing beside the table with an empty glass, smirking like a child who thought he and Oppos D just won something. Hey Dean, Vincent called out too loud, too casual. Sorry about the wine. Your wife and I were just having a little conversation. I got a bit clumsy, you know how it is. Too much to drink, not enough coordination. His friends laughed, barely. The kind of laughter that dies in the throat when it sees what's coming. Dean reached the table and looked at Jeanne. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He saw the dress. He saw her eyes. That was enough. Jeanne, he said quietly, are you okay? She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. Then Dean turned to Vincent. And for 10 long seconds, he just looked at him. No words. No emotion. Just silence. And that silence? It was terrifying. Vincent shifted, suddenly unsure. Like I said, it was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning. Or buy her a new one. No big deal. Dean's voice was soft. No big deal. He glanced at Vincent's table, at the nearly full bottle of expensive 1961 Bordeaux sitting there untouched. He walked over, lifted the bottle, and returned to the table with it in hand. Everyone in the VIP section leaned forward, breath held. Nobody moved. Nobody knew what Dean was about to do, only that it was going to matter. Dean met Vincent's eyes. Let me help you with that clumsiness problem, he said. And then, without hesitation, he poured the wine over Vincent's head. It wasn't fast or sloppy. It was deliberate, controlled. The dark red liquid soaked Vincent's perfect suit, ran down his shoulders, dripped off his nose. Dean set the bottle down and said flatly, Oops, how clumsy of me. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. It wasn't just retaliation, it was a declaration. Dean Martin had just humiliated a mob boss in public, in his own territory, and he'd done it without breaking a sweat. Vincent's face twisted into something primal. He stepped forward, drenched, fists clenched. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to you? Dean didn't blink. I know exactly who you are, he said. And I know exactly what you did to my wife. Touch her again, and you'll need more than a dry cleaner. Behind Vincent, his associates stood up, ready to move. The air turned electric. One wrong step, and it would explode into violence. But Dean didn't flinch. He stood his ground, calm as a statue. And then, from across the room, a new voice cut through the silence. Vincent, that's enough. Vincent froze. That voice, deep, steady, commanding, didn't belong to some flunky or cocktail waiter. It belonged to a higher-up, someone with real authority. A mob boss above Vincent in the food chain. A man who rarely stepped into public disputes, because usually he didn't have to. But tonight, he made an exception. The man stepped forward through the stunned crowd, his steps slow and deliberate. He wasn't angry. He wasn't panicked. He was simply done. "Vincent," he said, "you're drunk. You disrespected Mrs. Martin." Dean responded, "It's over." The words landed like a gavel hitting a courtroom bench. Final. Unquestionable. Vincent looked at his superior, then at Dean, then at the room full of witnesses. His face was a war zone. Rage, embarrassment, confusion, shame, twisting beneath the wine dripping from his hair. If he escalated, he'd be challenging not just Dean Martin, but the very structure of the mob itself. If he backed down, he'd look weak. But he wasn't being given a choice. "I apologize, Mrs. Martin," Vincent muttered, teeth clenched so tight they could have cracked. It was inappropriate. Jeanne didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The senior boss turned to Dean next. "Mr. Martin, I apologize on behalf of my associate. This won't happen again." Dean gave a small nod. "I appreciate that." Vincent and his crew turned to leave, trailing Bordeaux and broken pride behind them. The VIP section stayed silent until the last of them disappeared behind the velvet curtain. Then, all at once, the tension snapped. Conversations erupted like fireworks, people leaning in, whispering, replaying every second of what they'd just seen. Dean didn't bask in it. He didn't make a scene. He sat back down beside Jeanne and gently took her hand. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Are you okay?" Jeanne finally let a tear fall, the adrenaline loosening its grip. "I'm okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Dean called over a waiter. "Get my wife a robe or a jacket," he said, "and bring us 2 glasses of champagne." The waiter nodded. "Celebrating something, Mr. Martin?" Dean smiled, that familiar, relaxed Dean Martin smile. "Yeah, we're celebrating the fact that my wife didn't throw her own drink on that bastard. Because that was the hardest thing I've ever seen anyone do." By sunrise, the story had already traveled the length of the strip. From blackjack tables to backstage lounges, everyone in Vegas was whispering the same thing. Dean Martin poured wine on Vincent's head, and Vincent apologized. It was unthinkable. A public humiliation of a mob boss. And yet, there were no consequences. No quiet revenge. No retaliation. Just a single message sent loud and clear to the underworld. "You don't touch Dean Martin's wife." Vincent never approached Dean again. In fact, he went out of his way to avoid him. Whenever Dean entered a room, Vincent found a reason to leave it. He learned something that night he hadn't learned in 20 years of mob power games. Fear fades, but respect echoes. As for Jeanne, she never wore that Dior gown again. The deep red stain never fully came out. But she didn't throw it away. She kept it in the back of her closet, tucked in a garment bag, not because of what it reminded her of, but because of who it reminded her of. Years later, in an interview, she was asked what it felt like when Dean poured the wine on Vincent's head. Jeanne smiled. It felt like being married to the right man. She didn't need to elaborate. Because in that moment, when the room was watching, when her dignity was on the line, Dean didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He acted. Quietly. Calmly. With purpose. And that's why it mattered. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it made headlines. But because it made a statement that even mobsters had to respect. If you cross this line, there will be consequences. The real lesson of that night at the Sands Hotel had nothing to do with wine, or violence, or even the mob. It was about boundaries. It was about knowing where your line is, and being willing to hold it, even when it's dangerous. Dean Martin could have ignored it. Could have kept the peace. Could have filed a complaint, pulled some strings behind the scenes. But he didn't. Because some things matter more than comfort. More than reputation. More than safety. That night, in front of the most powerful men in Las Vegas, Dean didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't start a war. He simply reminded everyone who he was, with one calm, deliberate act. And that act earned him something far more rare than fear. It earned him respect. Not just from the mob. Not just from the elite crowd watching. But from his wife. From everyone who's ever felt powerless in the face of someone bigger, louder, or more dangerous. Dean Martin didn't win because he was famous. He won because when the moment called for it, he stood up, not with fists, but with unshakable presence. And that is power.